The following is a Hoop Ball presentation. Welcome to the Fantasy NBA Today podcast.
Well, I think we had to assume that this was going to happen. I was fighting it yesterday, and then did a 4-hour trade deadline live show, and then broadcast 2 basketball games, college hoops games, back-to-back for an 8-hour broadcast day, which I get it. A lot of us do 8-hour work days, but it's really hard to yell into a microphone for 8. Not consecutive, but 4 consecutive, and then a break, and then another 4 consecutive hours. And not surprisingly, I am much sicker today than I was yesterday. So what we're going to do on this podcast, and we're going to try to keep it marginally brief, although there's a lot to cover, so I don't want to skimp on anything. But I got to figure out a way to get through this day, and so you guys are stuck with me on it. Welcome to Fantasy NBA Today, everyone. I'm Dan Besbris. Hopefully some of you found this show because of the live trade deadline show on YouTube yesterday, and if you're new to the hoop ball situation, welcome. We are always thrilled to have you. What I'd like to do on today's podcast, and sort of a no fuss, no muss kind of show. It's just me solo. Everybody's basically getting a little bit of a respite after yesterday's madness. The trade deadline that was fairly exciting, not overwhelming. Marc Gasol, obviously the biggest piece to move from team to team, and we sort of knew that something was going down in Memphis. We just didn't know to where, or specifically which guys were going to get blown up in the Grizzlies situation. And then other than that, the biggest trades occurred before trade deadline Thursday. But the plan for today is to just break down the trade deadline and some breaking news that shook out this morning, and then let you chill for the weekend, effectively, until we get back around to Monday, and we'll do our reverse chronological lightning round stuff. This show is not necessarily a show for those that missed the trade deadline live special yesterday. This is kind of like, now that it's had a day to sit on our brains, we can go back through the stuff and break it down again. If you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm at Dan Besbris. I would strongly suggest you follow Hoopball on Twitter, at HoopBallFantasy. That's the blurb feed where, for instance, yesterday, anytime anything went down on trade deadline Thursday, the blurb feed is the one that put out the note and also broke it down in a little fantasy blurb. We call it a blurb feed. Simple enough. Most of you know this routine, just breaking it down in case there are any of you that are jumping in for the first time. And again, welcome. Okay. First of all, the breaking news. I want to knock that out of the way real quick because this show is going to be chilling over the weekend, and by Sunday, the breaking news will probably no longer be breaking. But the biggest one, and this one will still be breaking over the weekend, is that Anthony Davis, after the trade deadline passed, the news came out that he was basically going to force his way into the lineup. He said he wanted to play. That was before the trade deadline. He would like to play the rest of the year, regardless of where he sits. And it sounds like the league is putting a little bit of pressure on the Pelicans to let him get out there for at least a little bit. What does that mean for him going forward? Back-to-backs are probably not happening. They don't want to risk him suffering any sort of overuse injury, the type of stuff, the non-contact stuff that ends up taking forever to heal. They don't want to drive his value way down. But they also need to sell some tickets, whether it's people that are going to boo him or applaud him or whatever it is. He's going to be out there for some stretch of time in non-back-to-backs. If I had to guess, and this is 100% a guess because this type of situation comes around but once in a full moon, I would think that he probably plays 28 minutes per game when he's out there instead of, 34 to 36. He's a guy that was out on the floor a lot when he was healthy. They always try to scale him back. I think he was at 37 minutes per game this year, which is just crazy. For a guy who's always hurt, and then to be in the top, I think he's in the top 3 in minutes per game on the season, is a travesty. And again, an example of how they just needed something else. They tried to bring in pieces, but it never really fully fit. Niko Mirotic was probably the best piece they could have brought in. And then he missed a bunch of time this year with injury, and that hurt them a lot. As it turned out, in sort of an odd twist, Rajon Rondo was a big help for that team last year, and then the Lakers pilfered him away, and they went and got a banged-up Elfrid Payton, who's just not. They were like, oh, well, you can probably just be Rajon Rondo, and he's not. Passing-wise, he's not even close. Defensively, he should have been better, but there's so many spots in this Pelicans team where they just miss defensive assignments that it sort of doesn't matter if Elfrid Payton is better than Rajon Rondo on the defensive end because somebody's just whiffing on something. Nobody plays any defense. And so Anthony Davis asked out. Sorry, there's going to be some coughing on today's show if I can't hit the pause button fast enough. And now he wants to play. So let's say his 37 minutes come down to 28. By all accounts, that's about a 25% cut in his minutes. We're rounding a little bit. 28 minutes is about 9 1/3. So, another 9 1/3 will put you to 37 1/3. We're going to go ahead and call that close enough. So we're going to take off a quarter of his production in every statistical category. He's now going to average 1.5 turnovers per game. So we're going to go on 75% on every single thing he does. His points are going to come down from 29 to, I guess that'd be 21 or 22. Rebounds are going to come down from 13.5 to roughly, I guess that would be a little over 10. He's going to hit about 0.7 three-pointers a game. His assists are going to drop to 3 and change. His steals will come down from 1.7 to 1.4. 1.3, 1.4. Blocks will come down from 2.5 to 2-ish. That's still a really good basketball player. So let's go through those numbers once again. That's 22 and 10 with 3 assists, 1.4 steals, and 2 blocks. That still is probably a top 3 fantasy player. Can you believe that? That, by the way, is an example of how far out in front of everybody Anthony Davis is when he's healthy. James Harden, who's having just an unbelievable run, the type of crazy production that you could only ever dream of getting out of a guard-type player. The scoring, 36.5 points per game, 7 rebounds, 8 assists, 2.2 steals, 5 three-pointers a game. Somehow he's managed to do it on a shooting percentage that's only hurting you a little bit. Obviously, it's very high volume, so it, puts a little ding on things. But, he's not hurting you that much more than, looking down the list a little bit, like Damian Lillard. He doesn't even hurt you that much more, and the volume that he's taking is crazy. But anyway, this isn't about James Harden. What this is about is Anthony Davis's value to a basketball team. And so I know a lot of you out there are like, this is brutal. This is the worst news ever. He's going to skip their 4 back-to-backs. He's going to play limited minutes when he's actually out there. But if we really stop and analyze what the drop-off might be, mind you, Niko Mirotic is now gone. Markieff Morris is getting bought out. So the front court is fairly open these days, as per usual. Not that it needs to be for Anthony Davis. He's obviously the number one option when he's out on the floor. But if you're worried about things taking a massive hit, I don't think you really have to be. By all accounts, and just going based exclusively on a value per roster slot number, Anthony Davis was number 1 in the NBA over James Harden by 20%, despite how incredible James Harden's been. And this is on a per-game basis because, obviously, AD's missed some games lately. They've been holding him out for the trade discussion. On a totals basis, yes, he falls behind a couple of guys because he's missed basically the last 10 games. I think he's number 3 behind James Harden and Paul George, who's also been incredibly durable this season. Kevin Durant, by the way, number 4 in that department. But let's go back to a per-game basis. And let's assume that Anthony Davis is not going to be held out for any reason other than the back-to-backs. Okay? Fair enough. The New Orleans Pelicans right now, who are absolutely on the outside looking in on the playoff picture, and they don't appear to be in any position to make a run at it. They're something like 6 games back of the Clippers, and then there's 5 teams in between them in a playoff spot. So let's assume that they're not going to make a push at anything. They've played 55 games, which means there are 27 left, and 4 of those are back-to-backs. 23 games of Anthony Davis at a top 3 production is pretty freaking good. let's get even more brutal with him. Let's say that they sit him the last week of the season just because. Just because it's like, it's kind of a final screw you for making us play you. I don't actually think that happens. I think that Pelicans are going to, maybe the last road game of the year he sits out. But, they play the Warriors on April 9th, which I believe is the last day of the regular season for everybody. Double checking on that. No, it's actually the day before. So that's that last Tuesday. They might rest him in Sacramento on the 7th of April because, whatever. But they've got home games against the Lakers the last week and a half of the year and against the Warriors. I got to believe he's playing in those games, especially that Lakers game. You better believe it. Go try to beat him before New Orleans feels like he gets yanked out from underneath him. So let's knock another 2 or 3 games off. And now he's down to 20 games the rest of the year. If you're in a roto format, you're hanging on tight because 20 games of Anthony Davis is worth as much or more than 27 games of pretty much everybody outside of first rounders, which is, again, what I'm talking about here. When you look at total value on the year, Anthony Davis, despite playing in only 41 of his team's 55 games, he's still number 3 in the entire NBA. Total value. The only guys, as we mentioned, in front of him, James Harden, Paul George. And then Kevin Durant, who's played 53 games. That's 12 more than AD. He's behind him. So is Kat. So is Jokic. So is Vooch. All these guys that have played 50-some-odd games. Giannis is 8th. Lillard is 9th. So let's not panic here. I think where you do run into a little bit of a hiccup is if you're in a head-to-head league. Because then you have to look at the Pelicans' schedule and wipe out those head-to-head games. And now you're concerned with where they occur as opposed to just the fact that they exist. The Pelicans' back-to-backs that fall in your fantasy playoffs are limited, if I'm not mistaken. I think this is a league thing. They're trying to cut them down towards the end of the year. They've got one on March 1st and March 2nd, and that might be the only one that falls in anybody's fantasy playoffs. In fact, for most of us, I think my fantasy playoffs actually start right after that. So it doesn't impact you in a huge way in head-to-head leagues, especially if your league doesn't go to the last couple games of the season, because I think they probably do rest him in at least one of those road games against the Suns or the Kings. He probably doesn't play in one of those. He might not play in the game against the Magic on the road on the 20th of March. I mean, we're grasping at straws here a little bit. The home games, I think they want him out there. I think the fans either want to cheer him or boo him, but either way, it's selling tickets, and he's going to want to play those games. So, no, I'm not selling Anthony Davis. I think this news is excellent that he's going to force his way into the lineup. As I mentioned, if you were kind of a bubble team and you bought low and you sent out, a top 25 guy for AD, like, I don't know, who the heck is top 25 on a per-game basis lately? Klay Thompson, he's number 25. Chris Paul, 26. Aldridge, 27. Conley, 23, although obviously his outlook is pretty good as the last man standing in Memphis until he maybe gets shut down. Those guys, what if you sent those guys out and you got AD back because the other owner figured he wasn't going to play, and you're the 5th place team in your league that suddenly traded a guy who's on a per slot impact basis like 4 times more valuable than the guy you gave away? That means that your player now has to play basically a quarter the number of games as the other guy to have the same impact, just from a math standpoint. I think if AD plays 20 games the rest of the way, he's going to be a top 10 totals value guy. So if you bought low in that window, you're probably in pretty good shape right now. It's going to be weird, and you're going to have to know there's going to be some missed games in there, but you set your expectations right. Hope for 20 games. Be super pleased if he hits 21 or 22, and be a little bit disappointed if he goes 18 or 19. But either way, that's a lot of games of AD that you could have had at a crazy low purchase price. I'm not usually that ballsy. I just had a weird feeling that Adam Silver wouldn't let this thing go down the way it did. And you can remember that. I think it was on last Friday's podcast where Brew and I actually kind of argued about this a little bit. And even a little bit on yesterday's trade deadline show. I thought he was playing. So did Brandon and Mike, I think, were the other two guys that were on team he's going to force his way in. In any event, that's the Anthony Davis news. That's a fun one to start the morning. That's an impact decision. The other breaking news this morning, Isaiah Thomas has been assigned to the Denver Nuggets G League affiliate. I don't care. I'm telling you that right now. Denver Nuggets are too deep, and they have too many guys that can actually play defense for him to carve out a big enough role. We're looking at a 20-minute guy, to me. I don't think he clears that at any point this season. Maybe he does in like an individual game, but on a per-game basis, he's not going to average more than 20 minutes. News number 3. Kevin Love is a game-time decision for tonight, Friday. That's a big deal. He's probably not going to play in back-to-back games the rest of the way either. But you know what? Again, I don't care. If you've been sitting on this dude for the last, when did he have surgery? November 1st? November, December, January, part of February. I mean, this is like 3 and change months he's been out. This is a huge development. They have a back-to-back tonight and tomorrow, so by all accounts, he'll play probably like 15 minutes in one of those 2 games. And then they don't have another back-to-back. Well, let's see. When is the next one coming up? They got a couple more games next week, and then they really don't play for a while. The All-Star break checks in like a week and a half is the All-Star break. And they've got a back-to-back on March 2nd and March 3rd, 11th and 12th of March. They have a couple blended in there. And then I think that's it. No, April 4th and 5th. Excuse me. Look at the rest of the schedule. So that, again, 3 games. What did I say? 3, 4 back-to-backs. That's not bad. That's a lot of games you're going to get out of Kevin Love. I think he's going to play in all of the other ones. There's sort of no reason. I know that they're tanking, but there's sort of no reason to hold him out at this point. They've been so brutally awful, and the bottom 3 teams all have the same opportunity. They're just going to hang out in that clump, and they're not going to play him 35 minutes a game. They'll probably play him like 24, and then they'll find a way to lose the game in the second half. This is a big development. Kevin Love should absolutely be owned and started not this weekend, but likely for their next one as his minutes start to come back up a little bit. This is one of those spots where unless you're in an unlimited games format, and I'll tell you right now, I'm actually not pulling him off of my injured list in a league where he's on there because you're gonna drop somebody else and you're going to play Kevin Love for 15 minutes tonight, Friday, and then he's going to sit out Saturday. And you could have had that roster spot either to stream somebody, maybe get 3 games out of it, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, if you pick up a guy who has a back-to-back today and tomorrow, then drop him for someone who's playing on Sunday, and then you roll out Kevin Love next week. You drop that other streaming dude, and then you get a guy who's actually going to play in all of their games, even if the minutes are slowly ramping up. He's been ready to go for about a week, it seems. So I think they were already working on conditioning a little bit. This is going to be a big, big chunk out of the value of guys like Ante Zizic and Larry Nance Jr. I wouldn't preemptively drop Nance. I probably would preemptively drop Zizic. I can't imagine him holding enough value with all of this going on. In fact, it's quite conceivable that neither of those guys is. So that's a fun deal. Other piece of news that broke on Friday morning is that Wayne Ellington will sign with the Detroit Pistons. I don't really care. I don't think he's going to play enough to be relevant out there. They've got too many guys that are floating around. Luke Kennard is listed as the starter. All this does is it chops into Luke Kennard. I was about to make him the breaking news of Friday morning, because I thought, oh, hell, maybe this guy gets 30 minutes. He could be kind of fun to have in 30 minutes with Bullock gone and Stanley Johnson gone. But they brought in now Wayne Ellington, so instead of 3 guys, it's 2 guys for those minutes. That's a little bit better. I would say watch list for Kennard, and I got to assume Ellington has been promised some amount of minutes, but I don't think I'm picking him up in advance. And he's not going to play. Does Detroit have a game tonight? I think they might have a game tonight. He hasn't even cleared waivers yet, so he's not going to be playing in their game against the Knicks tonight anyway. But a situation to monitor to be sure. Luke Kennard, I keep hoping that they'll cut him loose a little bit, but it hasn't really happened yet. He's a top 300 fantasy guy, and he hasn't been able to carve out a consistent role. His steals and blocks game is non-existent. He's mostly 3-pointers. Same with Wayne Ellington, although you mix in some steals with Wayne, and that's where you hope maybe he can overtake things and just start chucking away alongside Drummond and Blake Griffin. So I have a fleeting hope in Wayne Ellington. I have minimal hope in Luke Kennard. And frankly, this is the Pistons, so I generally have minimal hope overall. But I don't know who else is going to play there. That's sort of where we get to with this one. I mean, what else are they going to throw? Who else is going to even have a chance to get on the floor? With Stanley Johnson gone, he was playing decent-sized minutes from the wing off the bench. Reggie Bullock was playing 30-plus minutes as a starter. They sent away a pretty goodly number of minutes on this team. Let's get the exact numbers. Let's be real specific on this thing. The number for Reggie Bullock to this point was about 31 minutes, and Stanley Johnson was at 20. Okay, so he was a little bit lower than I realized. So that's 51 minutes that they sent away. Luke Kennard, to this point in the year, is averaging exactly 20 minutes on the nose as well. And Wayne Ellington, well, his minutes have been all over the place. It's averaged out to 21 also. All of these guys floating in that same bucket. But Wayne Ellington, his minutes have been, a handful of games where he's played 10 and a handful where he's played 31. There's been no consistency to it whatsoever. If, by some magical stroke, guys like Glenn Robinson III don't get any of these bonus minutes, and Bruce Brown don't get any of these minutes, and Langston Galloway doesn't get any of these minutes, I have to believe some of these guys will. So in a perfect world, 51 minutes are now up for grabs on the Pistons. And if Luke Kennard could get 10 of those and get up to 30, does that make him fantasy relevant? Based on his current numbers, the answer is no. Because that puts him at 12 points, 4 rebounds, still basically no defensive stats, and about 2 3-pointers a game on bad shooting. If Ellington can come in and he can get up into the mid to high 20s, he is fantasy relevant. Because, yes, his field goal percent is going to be very low, but you put him at 27. I mean, this is, I think, a high number. I don't think he's getting to that. But if you put him at 27 minutes, he's a guy that could actually hit 3 3-pointers a game. And that's an elite number where, yes, I realize that 3-pointers are easier to come by, but there just aren't that many dudes in the NBA that are hitting 3 or more. In fact, the number is 6. And if you roll Klay Thompson and Damian Lillard in there, who are at 2.8 or above, then the number is 8. Curry's at 5.2, Harden is at 5, Paul George is at 3.8, Buddy Hield 3.4, Kemba Walker 3.2, JJ Redick 3.1. There's a reasonable possibility that you get a guy like Wayne Ellington and he goes out there and hits 3 3-pointers a game and averages not numbers all that dissimilar from JJ Redick, actually. Slightly lower field goal percent, higher number of steals. I think Ellington would give you 1 to 1.2 steals a game in that chunk of time. So speculative pickup only if you have an open roster slot. He's going to be pretty widely available in most leagues. And I don't know if anybody's going to go out and grab him immediately upon this news breaking, especially because he's not going to play tonight, and they play again on Sunday. So I may be getting that wrong. I think he's still listed as a member of the Phoenix Suns in most spots. So now we got to pull up. Now we got to pull up the Detroit Pistons schedule to make sure that we're getting the days right for these guys. This is quite an exercise. So let's look at the Detroit Pistons schedule. They play tonight, and then they don't play until Monday, actually. So they're off both days of the weekend. So that means the first game you'd get out of Wayne Ellington wouldn't be until next week. So if you're fighting for something, is that a risk you're willing to take? Has he been promised the starting job? These are things we don't know yet. I would assume that he will play a decent amount, but a decent amount doesn't necessarily mean 30 minutes a game. I don't fully understand it. Like, why, if you're Wayne Ellington, why don't you go to a team that's competing for a playoff spot? The only other reason would be either more money or more playing time. Maybe he feels like he's going to get out there and get 30 minutes a game and carve himself out a contract for next year. So that, and this is, you're hearing me sort of think through it a little bit more even while we're talking, because this news just broke this morning. This is, by the way, now you're hearing like handicapping in action. My thought is, okay, so we knew teams like the Lakers were interested in Ellington, along with many others who are making a big-time playoff push. The Pistons, you try to convince me that team is making a playoff push, you're going to need a lot of time of me sitting still and listening. They're at 24 and 29. I know they're the 9 seed in the Eastern Conference, and that means they're only a game and a half back of the Heat. So they do, by all accounts, have a chance to make the playoffs, but they're just going to get whipped by the Bucks or the Raptors in the first round anyway. So if you're Wayne Ellington, it's not like Detroit said, hey, come here and help us win a championship. That's the pitch from teams like, I don't know, the Thunder, the Lakers, the Rockets, anybody else that's has any kind of outside chance of getting through the first round of the playoffs. And even if he stayed in the Eastern Conference, the 76ers, I think, were looking for more shooting. The Pacers got Wes Matthews, so that sort of took them out of the running there. I don't know why you pick the Pistons unless the answer is money or playing time. Do we want to take the chance that it's playing time and make a speculative pickup? Okay, now I've settled on an answer. The answer is only if you desperately need 3-pointers, because there may not be, at any point the rest of the year, a coin flip on a guy that could hit 3 3-pointers a game. This could be the last one. And so, we rumble along. So that's the Wayne Ellington news. La-di-da, right? I don't know why I spent so much time on that, but you never know. Teams need 3-pointers. I got a team that needs some threes. What do I do? Do I drop somebody? I love this team. Nobody I want to drop on that club. Delon Wright, who I picked up yesterday, probably the closest thing to a potential drop, but damn if he couldn't turn into something special. Okie dokie. That's your breaking news for the day. Let's go over some of the trade deadline stuff. I'm not that curious about the box scores from yesterday's games. I mean, we could talk about a couple of things, but most of the teams that are interesting are teams that are missing pieces. We'll throw a shout-out to Miles Turner, who had more steals and more blocks than rebounds and assists in yesterday's game. He had 4 steals, 6 blocks, 3 3-pointers, 2 rebounds, and 3 assists somehow, as they waxed the zombie Clippers 116-92. Minnesota needs to get healthy. Jared Bayless got hurt, and he's not very good anyway. He was sort of hanging on. You know how Bayless can do his 2 weeks of being relevant. Tyus Jones, Jeff Teague, Derrick Rose, Rob Covington. I'm betting all of those guys are back after the All-Star break, and Minnesota will make one last push, and that'll be about it. We've seen Dario Saric start to play a little bit better lately. Keep one eye on him. He and Taj Gibson still splitting minutes, which kind of ruins everything, but again, keep an eye on him. Jonathan Isaac, 5 more defensive stats. That's relevant. Atlanta, I wanted to talk about Kent Bazemore because he's still got just 16 minutes even now after the All-Star break. I am admittedly starting to become concerned on this front. I know Brew told me to just relax on yesterday's trade deadline show, but now that the Hawks are healthy, Taurean Prince is back, Kevin Huerter is healthy, all the other wings, presumably, they got John Collins at the power forward spot, although that doesn't have much of an impact. DeAndre Bembry is healthy. Vince Carter, the old man, is healthy. Trae Young is healthy. Basically, anybody that Bazemore could take their minutes, they're healthy. This was not a good game for Atlanta. They got beat up on by a much better team in Toronto, who they were sort of a zombie Raptors team also, and they looked just fine. Freddie VanVleet had 30 points in this game. Yes, Kawhi Leonard and Marc Gasol coming back is going to hurt him, but his minutes will trend up, by the way. He's a small winner from the trade deadline with Delon Wright and C.J. Miles being sent out, and only a big man coming back from the Memphis Grizzlies. But we'll get to that in just a minute. I wanted to talk about Atlanta here in looking at the box score. I am worried about Kent Bazemore. I'm giving him a couple more games to see if they'll bring his minutes back up, because now it's not a minutes restriction. He's fine. They're just keeping him down because, well, they're tanking, and they want him to get some minutes, and they want him to be involved and help the team on a day-to-day basis. But it's more important for them to lose and play their young wings in generally Prince and Huerter. I love Kent Bazemore. He only needs to get up to about 23 minutes a game to be fantasy relevant, but if he's stuck at 16, that's not going to be enough. So keep a very close watch on that, and he could end up being a guy we move for someone that gets hot. Memphis, this is a zombie Memphis team, so I'm going to talk about them as it relates to the trade deadline. The Lakers, a game winner over the Boston Celtics from Rajon Rondo. That was big, man. Nothing puts trade deadline garbage in the rear view faster than a massive road win against your all-time rival Boston Celtics. It moved the Lakers back to within a game and a half of a playoff spot in the Western Conference. They're only a half game back of the Kings as well. LeBron is back, and things are likely going to be a little bit better for LA than they were for the last month and a half. From a fantasy standpoint, obviously the removal of Ivica Zubac is a big deal for JaVale McGee. He wasn't ranked particularly highly from yesterday's game because he missed. He went 3 of 5 at the foul line, but 17 and 8 with a block in 29 and a half minutes. That's enormous. Even if Mike Muscala takes a couple of his minutes, he'll take a few from Tyson Chandler as well. JaVale McGee goes back to being the lead horse at the center spot by a lot, and so I think we're all pretty glad we hung on in that one. Caught a break with Zubac getting sent out. Reggie Bullock will be joining the team shortly. He'll likely be a part of the Lakers' next ball game, and I'm not picking him up because there's a Josh Hart and a Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and a Lance Stevenson that are all fighting for minutes in those same spots. If he separates himself, fine, but he's shown himself to just be a three-point shooter, and that's just not that interesting. That's where you'd prefer to have a guy, believe it or not, like a Wayne Ellington, who gives you more in the steals department and generally more in the threes department on a per-minute basis. Daniel Tice played well, but I'm not biting on that. Al Horford is going to be the guy most of the time. San Antonio lost in Portland. We're seeing some pretty good games out of Jake Layman on the Portland Trailblazers, but not enough to get him up over the hump. Rodney Hood played 25 minutes and had 14 points and a steal, but he also made 6 out of his 7 shots, and that's not going to happen most nights. So nope, not interested in that one either. For the Spurs, with Derek White out, there hasn't been a clear grab yet, especially with DeMar DeRozan back for this ball game. I think you just sit on this thing and hope that White is back in the not-too-distant future. Okay, let's talk trade deadline review. We started to hint at a few things, and I want to dive into the rest of them now, as this show is starting to get longer than I had hoped, and I'm going to be coughing my brains out at the end of this bad boy. In fact, you guys get to listen to me take a sip of water right now. Sorry. I could have paused, but damn it. I don't know. I just want to get this thing done so I can rest. Sorry, guys. Trade deadline stuff. Going back to, obviously, the first few trades, Kristaps Porzingis deal, it's looking like, and I think I disagree with a lot of other fantasy analysts on some of these things, and it's kind of cool, actually, that we don't all see things the same on this particular one, because it does create value for those of us who believe something different. And I don't know if I'm in the minority on any of these things. I just know that I've seen multiple opinions on all of it. And so that means that people are fighting for different players. Very cool. I like Tim Hardaway Jr. to carve out a decent role with Dallas. I don't think it'll be as free and easy as his first few weeks with New York this year, but at least they're going to play him. And at least he's going to have guys around him that know what they're doing a little bit. So I'm not worried about that. I also... And I'm surprised that people are less bullish on the Dallas bigs right now, with Harrison Barnes being traded away and DeAndre Jordan being traded away and literally no healthy big men coming back in those deals. They're actually going to stay on the roster. Zach Randolph is being bought out. It's opened up a boatload of minutes for Maxi Kleber and Dwight Powell. I can't figure out why I'm seeing people that are not all that excited about these dudes. I think this is a wonderful opportunity for both of them. I'm a Maxi Kleber fan over Dwight Powell right now because he's been getting the starting nod, but Powell is the better energy guy, so you'll see him with the better field goal percent. He's probably going to have a higher steals count. I'm thinking on a per-minute basis, he's probably going to be the better rebounder of the two. But, I mean, you're talking about, listen, Dwight Powell was playing only about 17 minutes a game when everybody was on this Mavericks team. Now that DeAndre Jordan and his 30-some-odd minutes are gone, and Harrison Barnes and his near 30 minutes are gone, 60 minutes of the front court just vanished, and 0 came back, unless you want to call Justin Jackson a power forward, and I don't. There are so many opportunities right now for Dwight Powell. I think he's going to easily play 27 minutes a game and should be owned in all 9 category leagues. And I think Maxi Kleber is going to push 30 minutes a game, and he should absolutely be owned in all 9 category leagues because he's a guy that'll get you rebounds, threes, steals, and blocks, and he does it on 45 or better % shooting, which is pretty good when you're adding some three-pointers to the mix. Maxi Kleber in 19 minutes a game was a top 150 guy. That's a number that can spike quickly when you add minutes. Remember, the separation between players, between basically the number 90th ranked guy and the number 170th ranked guy, is microscopic. So if you take Maxi Kleber and you add another third of minutes to him, let's take 19 and make it basically 28 now, he becomes a 10-point, 6 rebound, 0.7 steal, 1.8. Is that possible? Probably not, but maybe 1.8 blocks guy. And he jumps easily into the top 100 and probably has top 80 upside. So I'm very excited about Maxi Kleber. I don't know why other people are less enthused by him. I think he should be owned everywhere, and I think Dwight Powell should be owned everywhere for the chance that he is a top 100 center. These guys are not easy to find. I don't know, whatever. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe people do agree with me on that one. Anyway, I love that. I love that situation. On the New York side, Wesley Matthews has been bought out, and we just heard that Damian Dotson will likely start at shooting guard for the Knicks the rest of the way. I am less enthusiastic about Dotson, mostly because this is a David Fizdale thing. He actually averages about 25 minutes a game on the year, does Dotson, because, they do these things in New York where they just don't play for a while, then they play big minutes for a while. He's mostly a scorer. If he's out on the floor for 28 minutes, if that's what he gets, it's going to be to get you, 14 points and a couple of three-pointers and a couple of steals. So not that excited about it. He's not a big defensive guy. He's not a big passer. He's not great at getting to the free throw line and or making them, so let's not get too excited on this thing. In fact, he's shooting 69% at the foul line. But again, you put him in there for what if he somehow manages to get to 30 minutes a game, then you got a guy who's scoring, probably 14, 15 points, just because opportunities is available all of a sudden. Remember, they sent out Courtney Lee, Tim Hardaway Jr., and Trey Burke. They sent away 3 guards and got 2 back, and one of them got released. So Dennis Smith Jr. is the only guard that came back effectively in that deal now. And so that does open up quite a few minutes, but you're going to see some of them getting dumped on. Alonzo Trier and Mario Hezonja will play some wing minutes, and Moutier will come back soon, and Ntilikina will come back soon, so I'm not that enthused about this one. Other big storylines related to trade deadline stuff, the Clippers, I wasn't really interested in picking anybody up after their deal with Philadelphia, bringing back Landry Shamet, Wilson Chandler, and Mike Muscala, and then they traded Muscala for Ivica Zubac. This is hard to go over all in one show, by the way. I'm realizing I probably spent too much time on Anthony Davis. Ivica Zubac, to me, is probably going to play about 22 minutes a game with the Clippers. I am less excited about him than a lot of other fantasy analysts out there. When he gets around 22 minutes a game, he can actually be fantasy relevant. He'll give you, 10 and 8 in that bucket, maybe a block. But you're looking at more of a Taj Gibson-like, I think, fantasy line from Zubac because he's a decent foul shooter than, say, to me, JaVale McGee or even Maxi Kleber, these guys who might see more minutes or do more on a per-minute basis. But if you need a late-round center, I think Zubac can be that guy. I think he can be, a top 125 center with the Clippers. I just still think Montrezl Harrell is going to do most of the damage in the front court for that team, unless they somehow manage to play together. Otto Porter is going to be decent for Chicago. He should have been owned already. Bobby Portis and Thomas Bryant are going to be battling in that Washington front court. It remains to be seen, honestly, who can actually squeeze through the minutes. They traded for Portis and Jabari Parker, so it makes me think that those guys are going to see some sort of activity, but it almost makes all of them kind of difficult to own, honestly, because Markieff Morris also got traded on trade deadline day, but he wasn't playing lately anyway, which means they sent Otto Porter away and they picked up 2 guys, 3 if you count Wesley Johnson, and that just makes things even more crowded. Boo to that. So you may see all of these guys emerge with no fantasy value, but hopefully, if you had to rank them, I think Thomas Bryant, because of his stat set, still gets that lead mark. Other fringe guys that we haven't talked about yet. I don't think Iman Shumpert does enough in Houston to be fantasy relevant. I don't think Reggie Bullock, as we mentioned, does enough in LA to be fantasy relevant. Nico Mirotic takes a big hit at the deadline. Stanley Johnson is a guy to keep one eye on in case New Orleans just decides to rest everybody else and turn Stanley loose. So watch list. If he plays huge minutes in his first game for the Pels, you scoop him up. But not before. I don't think anybody picked him up post-deadline because he's been bad for so long. I would venture to guess that he's available in almost every single fantasy league out there. He's only 3% owned. He's a guy that's never really done much with his time on the floor, even when he's gotten it. But again, you put him in that New Orleans system, and if nobody else is playing, I mean, that's what it's going to come down to. If nobody else is playing, he can jump right to the front of the line. He could be their starting small forward. I don't know what Etuan Moore is going to do. They just picked him up, so apparently they like him at least a little bit. We shall see. We shall see. Keep one close watch on that guy, because they do still, I mean, Etuan Moore might play again, and Darius Miller is still fine, and they might go small and play, Elfrid Payton, Frank Jackson, Tim Frazier, and Drew Holiday at the 2. So it's not a guarantee, but, Stanley Johnson could play a couple of positions, 2, 3, and 4. If he carves himself out 28 to 30 minutes, then he's a guy that pops up. This is such an interesting time of year. There's just so much stuff that emerges. So he's a watch list guy for me. Nick Stauskas and Wade Baldwin are not on the list of people to watch. JaMychal Green is a guy I'm keeping one eye on in Clippertown. He could actually push his way to the front of the pack in that front court, or especially at the power forward spot if they go small. It's Gallinari as the starting power forward, most likely going forward, and Zubats and Harrell at center. So yes, there are kind of 4 guys there, but if they go big, I should say, and move Gallo down to the 3, then JaMychal Green pushes his way into 25 to 30 minutes, but that's also a watch list spot. Delon Wright, he's a guy that we picked up, advised to grab during yesterday's trade deadline show, and I'm inclined to say yes, just see how this plays out. He was, for the Grizzlies, by the way, kind of the guy they wanted in that deal. Jonas Valanciunas, that's fine. He's actually, by the way, from a fantasy standpoint, he's going to see a massive bump. There's almost no way he plays fewer than the 19 minutes a game he was getting with Toronto on a Memphis team that actually likes to walk the ball up. So this is actually a much better situation for him. But you can't try to tell me that the Grizzlies made this trade for Jonas Valanciunas. To me, he's a guy that was kind of a throw-in, not in the sense that they didn't want a center coming back, but, JV is making a lot of money. He signed through, I believe, next year, if I'm not mistaken, although next year might be a team or player option. Someone can probably help me on that on Twitter if I'm getting it wrong. But assuming it's a player option for $18 million, he's probably going to take it, because I don't think he's getting that much on the open market right now. So don't try to tell me that the Grizzlies wanted an $18 million center that they have signed through next season. That's not the prize in this. For Memphis, the prize is Delon Wright. He's the guy that they wanted. They wanted a whole host of picks, but if they could also get talented young dudes, then that's a great situation. Delon Wright is under team control for this season. Next year, I believe he becomes a restricted free agent. They could extend the qualifying offer or try to extend him long term. He's a really intriguing young basketball player who can do stuff across the board. He's a nice 9-cat guy. So I'm still saying grab Delon Wright. I know Mike Conley's still there, and I know that they brought in Avery Bradley. But by all accounts, this Memphis team wants to sort of try new stuff. And, I mean, I don't know if Avery Bradley plays much at all. Now, if we find out that Delon Wright is capping out at 24 minutes, then you move on. You go grab somebody else. But if they decide they want to just turn him loose and play him 30 minutes a game as their starting shooting guard or small forward, probably shooting guard, and, Justin Holiday at small forward, and maybe they go slow-mo at power forward potentially with Conley as the point guard, Wright can play a bunch of positions. He can back up at the 1. He can back up at the 3. If he can push his way to 30 minutes, he can be a top 75 fantasy guy. So that's a guy you hold on to in the hopes that that part does shake itself out. We already talked about Zubats in the trade with the Lakers. I don't think Mike Muscala carves out enough of a role. And that is basically the stuff that happened leading up to the trade deadline yesterday, at least in terms of kind of the small stuff going on. Wesley Matthews was bought out and intends to sign with the Indiana Pacers. I'm not picking him up. I think he'll play 30 minutes with Indiana, but I don't think that there's going to be enough there for him. It's going to be very similar to what he did in Dallas, where you can hope for a couple of three-pointers and not a whole lot else. Low percentages. The only time he had an opening in Dallas was when other people were hurt and he was able to take a bunch of extra shots. He's not going to have that type of opportunity on an Indiana team that has Darren Collison and Tyreek Evans and Corey Joseph and Thad Young and Bojan Bogdanovic and Miles Turner and Domantas Sabonis. Too much. Just too much. Waiting on to finding out where Enes Kanter is going to sign, waiting on finding out where Melo and Robin Lopez will sign. I don't know that any of those guys are going to make a dent in the fantasy landscape, but that basically takes us to the news of yesterday. We will continue to monitor all of this stuff over the weekend as these teams acquire their new players and we can sort of push the zombie teams aside. And believe me, I will continue to tweet about it. That is my promise. I'd like to put out today, if I have time on Twitter, probably this afternoon, a list of all the stuff I just talked about on today's podcast in terms of winners and losers from the trade deadline, pickups, drops, the centers. Remember, I had that list of like 17 centers that were kind of all on the fringe and which ones I like the most. I'm going to redo that on Twitter today. So a lot of big reasons to get Twitter if you don't have it already. At Dan Besbris, DanBesbris. I also want to take a moment to thank everybody not only for tuning into our trade deadline live show, but all of the pros that took time out of their day, middle of the day, folks, on a Thursday, bailing out on work and such, to hop on and talk fantasy sports with us. That was a lot of fun. It was cool to finally have an actual graphics encoder working on that trade deadline live show. I hope you guys enjoyed it as well. And we got a coupon code for Hawaiian Isles Kona Coffee. That's right. The good people over there at Hawaiian Isles gave us the coupon code HoopBall on any coffee purchase at their website, hawaiianisles.com. Use the coupon code HoopBall for 15% off. You can, again, follow them on Twitter at HI Kona Coffee. If you have any questions about their product, you can hit them up there. But definitely check out their good stuff. They are the presenting sponsor of all podcasts here at HoopBall, and they the title sponsor of our trade deadline live show yesterday. Have a lovely weekend, everybody. I am Dan Besbris. Somehow I got my way through this thing and only coughed one time. How about that? That's a win, man. The over-under was at like 2.5, so way under. The Sharps were on the under for this one. They said, Dan's going to figure this thing out. All I had to do was take sips of water in the middle of a podcast. Super professional. Coming up on Monday, we'll do a reverse chronological lightning round of the weekend and break down all of this trade stuff as guys play their first games for new teams. It's going to be a really important podcast on Monday. I can tell you that right now. And again, stay tuned to Twitter. Hoopball Fantasy and myself, Dan Besbris, will be tweeting about all this stuff as it happens. Huge, huge storylines. Team-changing pickups that might pop up during this next couple of days. This is where you really got to be honed in, and we'll do our best to guide you in that front. Thanks again, everybody, for listening. Rate and review the podcast if you have a moment. Check out the Hoopball Premium membership if you have a second moment. And if you have a third moment, take a deep breath, because the trade deadline is done, and the madness slows down just for a little bit. This is Fantasy NBA Today, a Hoopball presentation, also brought to you by Hawaiian Isles Kona Coffee. We'll talk to you Monday.
This has been a Hoopball presentation.